Good afternoon, everybody, and those who are not around. So,
we promised to make this quite interesting.
yes,
So maybe we need to go to the other hallways and get the health guys and everybody wants to talk about green. My goodness! Now when it comes to green sustainability, they run away. We need to get them back in.
yeah, I think what's going to be interesting today is talking about green buildings and the economics attached with green buildings and sustainability as we speak. But I think what would really help for the audience is that we break it down into three parts. The first part is talking about what do we really mean when we talk about green buildings and sustainability. That's point number one. It's important to understand that. Number two, coming on to the economics of what those things probably result into in terms of feasibility and economics. And finally, some of the solutions that we are trying to kind of find to address some of the gaps that are coming in the mass scale implementation of green buildings and sustainability. But to start the session, I think an introduction is required. I think I'm going to start with myself and then pass it on to Kamel. Look, I've been a serial entrepreneur. I run multiple businesses from consulting to real estate, right down to venture capital funds. I've had a very, very long Fortune 500 career internationally. Worked in about 4 continents before I called Dubai home. So that's what I do. So I run a consulting practice that specializes in building intellectual property and monetizing that for companies. And that's when I connected with the sustainable development space, because I've, in my career, licensed many sustainable design technologies across the planet. I also run venture capital funds that have an impact and ESG objective. Run a fintech fund in Singapore, a climate tech fund in Europe, and a food security fund in the Middle East. So yeah, that's my background, and I'm going to pass over the mic to Kamel.
Yes. Well, I'm quite an interesting career as well. A little bit more on the tech side. I started my career as an engineer with the U.S. Air Force in research and development. So our mission was to make the impossible possible, creating very new things, innovative things, coming to solutions to impossible problems. Got introduced to the environmental and area because the Air Force, like any other agency, had a lot of problems, and we were the lab that was doing a lot of the toxicology research, so, and the nerve agents and stuff like that. So we had to dispose of it, dismantle it, and I was given the task to help do that. And then we went to environmental and industrial infrastructure, came back and started expanding the horizon into going into the environmental and the sustainability, green technologies and so on, but more from the development side. How do we bring technology integrated with business practices, and how do we do better things? This is a very quick background. I'm also had an advisory firm, but like I said, on the first day, we do advisory on business and transactions, but focus more on project development and sustainable development and commercialization of sustainable technology. If you allow me, I just want to start this just by pointing the difference between what is a green building and what is a sustainable building. It's very important to understand there's a difference, okay, because people confuse these things. Now, they have some interlinks and cross with each other, but when you talk about green building, you're talking about a building that use materials that are friendly to the environment. Okay, you try to minimize the footprint, as they say it. But does this building mean that it's efficient? Is it sustainable? Is it comfortable to live in? Will it make you happy to live in? That's a different story. So, in sustainability is a little bit different, but it crosses with the environmental in a different way. I think it's very important to look at this, and I think between me and Amit, we try to shed some lights on some of our experiences and the technologies and what we're trying to do to continue to enhance all of that.
I think what would really help is, Kamal comes from a background where he understands the application of technologies in the green and sustainable building space, and what are the kind of efficiencies and inefficiencies, like he just said, that he's talking about. Whereas I'm a money man, so I come from the concept of money and return on investment. So we've got different takes, interesting takes on the concept of sustainable and green buildings. So I think jumping into it, Kamal, I think what would really help our friends to understand is when we talk about sustainable/green buildings as people understand, I think it's important to talk about areas of kind of water conservation, areas of energy efficiency, areas of green building materials, and a host of technologies that's available to consumers today to either apply it themselves or builders that are using to build. So shed some light on what we are really talking about here.
This is a really good and loaded question, because a sustainable building in the desert is different from a sustainable building in the rainforest, or a green building in the rainforest, and it's different from a sustainable building in a very cold environment, whether it's in a mountain or in the North Pole or whatever. So the concept of having a green building and a sustainable building is really a little bit different. It differs from place to place, and the technologies you apply is very specific to the issues of concerns. Here in the Gulf region, we're very concerned about water conservation, because water is a scarce resource and we have to spend a lot of money to desalinate and get fresh water. And also heat is the climate is quite big. In other areas, they have abundance of water, and they need to find a way that they can capture that water in a way and use it, or maybe pass it so it doesn't flood their areas, and so on. So the first concept is different from place to a place in terms of what we look at in terms of building a green or sustainable building. Not every building that you do green is really economic or really beneficial. It's basically, you need to look at the original of the designs. I really focus on technologies, innovative technologies, because I come from the R&D background of how do we make buildings more efficient, to optimize the use of existing infrastructure, and how do I look at the cost of that in terms of life cycle costs, because sometimes these things come with a hefty initial capital cost, and then how do I offset that from different sides. There are many technologies that are available, but do they apply, and are they important in the area that we live in? I give you a simple example. Let's say talk about renewable energy of solar power as an example. Everybody talks about solar power, but then you put it in a place like on the coast of the Atlantic city or the Mediterranean. You have a lot of poop that comes from birds. Or in the desert, you have a lot of dust. The cost of maintenance, people don't talk about that in terms of trying to do this. Is it feasible? In the desert, you have heat. With heat, you lose efficiency. So does that make sense? Do I put it on rooftop? So we have to battle with a lot of these questions, and then we have to approach it from a technical design of how do we achieve the objectives we want to achieve into this in simple designs and so forth. So what I would do in Dubai would be different than what I would do in terms of standard in Riyadh. It would be different than what I would do in Egypt or in Malaysia or in Singapore, or if I do in Iceland, for example. The concept is completely different in terms of what would be green and what would be sustainable at the same time.
No, that's a very, very relevant point. I think the other day when me and Kamal met and we were talking about what we got to speak, I think one of the main points that came up was, you got to look at sustainable and green development according to the region that it is getting built on. One size does not fit all. And I think it's got to be very specific to that local region. Something interesting, Kamal, that's always kind of run in my mind, that when you talk about sustainable materials, whether it's low volatile compounds, sustainable paints, recycled steel, recycled timber, and a lot of those different materials that are going into developments. Now, what I have kind of been always concerned about is when you look at an independent house, let's say a villa or an independent dwelling. Yes, it's feasible, it's possible, the materials are available. The whole dynamic changes, when you're looking at the scale of development and the scale of material procurement. What's your take on all this availability of these materials?
I want to take a step back into the early days. People who lived in Dubai or in Riyadh, or people who lived in a rainforest, regardless where they lived, when they built their dwellings or their cities, they build it in a way that make them very comfortable. They build it from materials that are local. They found out that if I build it with mud and straws and so forth, then the heat transfer from the outside to the inside, it became like a cave. They build it in a way that provide internal cooling and so on. We moved away from this with different technologies. Now we have concrete, we have steels, we have aluminum, and we have timber, we have paints, different paints, we have insulation material, and so on. There are, when I build a modern building today, in the past it used to be a dwelling for a family, and you have very nice air circulation, you have cooling effect. In fact, if you look at the history of air conditioning, they will tell you the Arab dwelling was one of the first air conditioning systems in Egypt and in the desert because of the way the cooling towers worked in terms of circulating the air in there. But if you look at today, let's look at steel. I want to do a platinum LEED or a green building. I use steel. Well, is this steel? What's the foot carbon print for the steel? How much energy did I use to do this? So is the steel sustainable? If I do glass is tempered glass, heat. There's energy. I'm using silica, of course, but is this steel or the glass? Is it what the carbon footprint? Concrete, insulations, and materials. Whether you use styrofoam, polystyrene, or whether you use ash or straws, from plant-based, for example, as an insulation material. So, if you look at all of these technologies, do we really I'm building something with all these that are non-sustainable materials, and then I'm trying to buy certificates to offset the carbon footprint. So now I have a sustainable. In the desert, to get a platinum LEED, I need to do, like a bicycle track or maybe a walk track. Is it feasible to do it in this temperature and heat? So it's a performance. Now, with modern building, again, we moved away from tradition. Today we're building, me and Amit were talking about, look at all the glass buildings. We're looking at towers and buildings that's similar to what you would find in New York or maybe some other places. But is it fit the local area? What's the energy performance of this? Okay, the cost. There are new materials that are coming with nanotechnologies that are evolutions of carbon absorbent paints. There are nanotechnologies that are available. There are different insulation materials, different materials for concrete, supplemental, and so on. So it's a difficult question. All of this stuff comes at a cost. Is the cost justifiable? Or how do we do this in a way that makes things affordable and long-term sustainable and so forth? And maybe later on we'll talk about some things that we're looking at in doing this.
When we talk about whether it's affordable or whether it's kind of cost-effective, I think when we dwell into the economics of how feasible really is to go down this ladder, or go up this ladder rather, I think you got to divide customer segments into mature markets. So you're looking at economies like New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Scandinavian countries, Central European countries, and much like that. And then the emerging space, which is pretty much the GCC, Africa, India, and the subcontinent. When you talk about mature markets, in Europe, Australia, New Zealand. The economics of sustainability really works out because government has a lot of incentive programs that could reimburse you literally 50% of the cost back in terms of the technologies that you're applying in housing and commercial and mixed-use development. The labor cost in these countries are very, very expensive. So offsetting that through technology, is a really good cost-saving measure. So when you're looking at these countries with a very evolved and a matured ecosystem and the government programs and policies that support you with incentives to go down the green route, yes, it's viable, it's feasible, it's got an obvious long-term effect on the costs of running these buildings. Now, when you look at the same concept in the emerging market space, so let's talk about the region Middle East, right? You've got Jordan, you've got Egypt, you've got Oman. Now, these countries are not particularly as wealthy as the likes of Saudi, the likes of UAE, the likes of Kuwait, the likes of Qatar. It becomes a big challenge for the government to step in and start building programs and plans to incentivize developers and individuals to start using the application of green technology and all these, various things that we talked about in water conservation, energy conservation, recycling, and many, many more technologies that make your environment more sustainable and green. Now, that's where the problem really happens on the first aspect of the initial cost and the long-term cost objectives. The second aspect, when you talk about economics, is really dwelling into the concept of real estate. Now, when our parents bought properties or when our grandparents bought properties, there was obviously a long-term view on how the property would fare across generations and how the value would kind of increase. Today, in the modern day, with all the developers coming out with investment properties, multiple dwellings, I don't think most people are buying properties looking at a 10 to 20 to 30 year horizon. It's all about buying, selling, coming in low, selling high. It's a buyer's market or a seller's market. In that kind of a cyclical turn where properties are getting shuffled quicker, I don't think the long-term cost advantage of implementing green technologies and what it costs to run a certain apartment or even a whole building is of concern, because the ownership is changing so rapidly that nobody can really, take advantage of that situation. So, in your opinion, Kamal, what do you think about these areas?
Look, your point on in mature markets today, let's say in the U.S. You do a solar, you want to provide power to your home. Okay, you do a solar setup. Now you have a way where excess energy is sold back to the grid. They track the kilowatt hours that you pass to the grid of excess, and then at night you can, whatever you use, at the end of the day you will get a bill that offsets between what you have given to the grid and what you have taken out at night in the grid, which basically helps you save the cost of buying a battery, which is quite expensive on resources and so on. In the region here, that kind of methodology is not there. And when you talk and I had really long discussions in Saudi with the electricity company and other places. Why can't we? I put a solar set up, okay, and access energy I can pass to the grid like we would do, because it would make it feasible. It will help me save money. It's very good to the business. But most of these companies are semi-government or established by the state. They have monopoly on this. So it's very difficult for them to accept that you are, if you pass to the grid, that means you're selling. We're the electricity company. The same thing we had in Jordan when I went to talk to the Jordanian company as we were trying to implement some of those sustainable or green initiatives. The mindset is shifting, but it's shifting very slowly. It's making things difficult and hopefully better. But you need for us to build better cities, more sustainable and more green cities, by implementing designs or whatever, you really need government incentives or incentives that allows the developers to say, yes, I would love to do this because it saves you money. Whether it's a support in terms of grants, whether it's kickback on taxes, whether allow him to do better, increased build-up area on the areas of land that he has. There need to be something, and so forth. It's lacking in this region.
That's interesting. Like, you know, when we really talk about how feasible is to build green, I think anywhere in the world, mature market or emerging market does not matter. You know, you've got two distinct set of people buying these properties. One is a human being who is buying low income to medium income housing, and one is a human being buying premium housing. Now, in some cases, there's a very strong argument and case to be made that with the application of a lot of these green technologies within the dwelling or within an apartment, there is a possibility to increase the price and lure premium buyers to pay you a premium for that property because it comes fully loaded, like we call it in cars, and you know, it's got all the latest gizmos that would help you offset carbon, be more sustainable, and you know, save in the long run. But that's what I'm seeing even in mature markets and markets like Dubai and Abu Dhabi is it's limited to premium housing. People who can afford to buy those kind of places. When we talk about low income to medium income housing, that's where the problem starts because the benefit, people can't pay a premium. Developers are trying to offset costs heavily. So loading these products onto a building or technologies onto a building, the initial cost is high. Their target customer is not willing to kind of, incur that cost. So from a mass market perspective where low to medium income housing is concerned, I still feel the economics is quite tainted and it's not favorable to implement a lot of these technologies purely because of the economic strata and the per capita income of the consumer buying into these buildings. And if you really, I mean, those who've done any sort of real estate development, no matter how small that might be, as small as even renovating your own house to flip it and sell it, you would understand everywhere that you save money, every per square feet that you save money is coming into your pocket. So anything that's motivated with conscious pricing or affordable pricing that will get customers to buying very quickly. Unfortunately, even in mature markets, the level of green development and sustainability is not getting followed. Where the premium end of the housing, there's a lot of stuff happening and customers are willing to pay a premium. What's your take on it?
Yeah, this is quite interesting and quite important because if you look at the real estate market, and you try to segment it between luxury, medium, mid-class, and you're talking about the affordable for low income. The majority fits in the low income, and so if you want to do an impact on footprint, or whether it's carbon footprint or energy performance, you really need to tackle these segments of this. Now, this is a good point a good area to jump into. What are we doing or trying to do into this? Because nothing comes without a solution. But will this solution solve this for everybody? I don't think so. But it moves us a step forward in doing this. In Dubai, for example, with all the towers, of course, they're doing it with glass. That's very bad. A lot of energy. But they are, instead of having air conditioning for each of the apartments or each of the spaces, they have a district cooling. So now they save a little bit on energy to provide district cooling. To the user, he has no choice. Now, instead of paying an electricity bill, he has to pay an electricity bill, an air cooling bill, or a heating bill. It's just added another bill to him. But from a bigger perspective, it uses less energy from the grid. So it allows the grid to be stretched even further. So there are some solutions in this. When we go to low-income housing and medium housing in terms of, because now they're going into vertical, high-density setups. There are simple things that proper architects or good architects are doing, is that with little cost, and like, for example, if I build an apartment complex, let's say a tower, and I make my face east and west, then the apartment on the west is going to get a lot of energy and a lot of heat load coming in because of the sun and the way the sun strikes. But if I make it face north and south, and I insulate the areas where it's getting a heat load, then the heat load on the building could be less. It's a way to reduce the heat load. It's a way to allows me for air conditioning to be more effective. In certain areas where it's northwest, northeast, or whatever, that physically the location doesn't allow you to do this, then you can probably implement some umbrellas around or some shading on the windows that allows you in a very nice aesthetic way reduce the heat load. There are new emerging technologies. I was involved in R&D with relations to all of this, but you can also look at active walls where some of the air that's coming in is circulated and to maintain temperature, inside temperature in a way that's proper. But again, this adds another cost, okay? When I think the real estate sector and the developers, regulators are trying to force this in a very soft manner, but if they force it, then it's an education to the let's say the low-income housing, okay? The low-income guys. If you buy a smart home, meaning a home that's sustainable, that uses less energy, in a period of 5 years, for example, then you can save a lot of money on your bills, because that's out-of-pocket expense every single month. Okay, of course you're paying less on a normal building, but for this one, you are able to live more comfortable, healthier, you reduce your medical bills. So it's a matter of education. Now, will these guys listen or not? In most cases, it's very difficult, okay? So this is my take. There are things that can be done, but are we doing everything we can? We're trying, but if you want to really do an impact, it has to be, like you said, the middle and the low income. We have to find a way to do better housing for them and more affordable.
No, that's really true. And while we are talking about solutions, that how do we really drive the impact of green and sustainability, I think it's very important to understand that there's a high volume of government intervention that's needed. But then there's no point talking about it because, people like us really don't influence governments and build policy and implement those policies mass scale. These are long-term ramification in parliaments, with very little control of the private sector, especially on the small scale. If you're a consumer buying a property, let's say. I think the concept lies in, number one, I would say the solution, I'm going to quickly talk about a few technologies that my fund has invested in, and we are in the research and development process of trying to disrupt markets. But on a macro scale, I think it all starts from the design. Now, in 2008, 2009, which is one of the first times that I came to Middle East, I was doing a project commercializing one of the largest architecture practices in the world. And they hired me as a consultant for a market entry, and we were looking at projects in the UAE, in Qatar, as well as in India. So some of the projects that we work on is Masdar, which is very well known in Abu Dhabi, the Qatar Financial Center, as well as the Delhi Metro Road Congress, which is building the metro network for New Delhi during the Commonwealth Games. And each of them came with a high degree of sustainability that was a mandate from the government of the day. And that's when, when you try hanging out with architects all the time, you're talking their lingo, you're understanding about design and how design is inspired. Now, if you look at, there's a logic why when you go to different parts of the world, there is different kind of architecture and why all the buildings don't look same. Now, the logic behind that, more than the aesthetics, is number one, local availability of raw material. That is obviously designed to keep in mind the environment, the climate, and the way people live in certain parts of the world. Number two, the entire physics of the design that makes it more sustainable for the climate and the ecosystem that you live in. For example, if you look at areas with very high seismic zones, earthquakes, you would see rapid use of timber and materials that are less hazardous when there's a calamity of that scale that happens. So when you travel across the world, you see these local forms of architecture, building materials, and the way of construction. Now that's kind of lost in the modern times. Now every city is trying to look like each other. It's all about who's got the best skyline and the best buildings and the tallest buildings. Now I think the answer lies in adapting local architecture to the region, to the environment, to the geography, and using a lot of materials available locally. Now, even if you don't do that, I mean, let's take an example of a project anywhere in the world. Most of the material is imported in. And the moment you ship, like, Australia is big in mining, so they do a lot of iron ore. When you ship material halfway across the planet, look at the amount of carbon that you're putting in. So I think areas like that are really, really important to understand, how local that do you go, what kind of local materials you use, and also it's got an economic significance. The more local you go, the more, advantages to the local businessmen and the local ecosystem. You're trying to help them, and that's what's called ESG, right? You're not only solving the environment problem, but you're also solving the social problem. So that's in the design. In terms of just talking about few things that we are doing, and I'm sure Kamel will shed light from his aspect, we are trying to disrupt the entire supply chain of styrofoam. Now, styrofoam is used in insulation in various methods, and we are using sustainable compounds like chicken feather in poultry that is just thrown away, and building a technology that can solve the insulation problem, perform better, 100% biodegradable, and cheaper than using styrofoam. So these are some of the stuff that we are doing in our own regard, and then of course the use of hydrogen in producing consumer electricity, whether it's in electric vehicles or whether it's in laptops or mobile phones. So a lot of research we've bootstrapped with universities that are kind of functioning on that area, that can a localized hydrogen be used as fuel cells to power buildings. And I'm not talking about just houses, but even high density, low cost housing where you've got hundreds and hundreds of apartments. How stable would hydrogen cells be in the entire vicinity? So those are some of the areas that we're investing in and bootstrapping research in. What do you say, Kamel?
Funny enough, we invested in fuel cells before, and it's quite interesting because it's an evolving technology. But when you look at in cities today, and in my original talk in boosting sustainable technologies and financing options, we really look at starting from design. Of course, you have existing cities and you need to do retrofits and so forth, but regulatory intervention and government intervention is quite important. Local sourcing of materials. Right now in Saudi, and there's an initiative to kind of push for local content in buildings, using local materials, local traditional design methodologies or architecture, because you really don't want to look, you want to look modern, but you want to look in a way that's with technology, but you maintain the heritage and the culture, instead of going completely steel, glass, bring everything from outside, and so on, okay? Unless you have your own ore, steel ore, and your own thing, and you're using green hydrogen to power the kilns, and you're producing sustainable materials and so on. Everything has a positive, using, for example, like the chicken feathers as an example. Of course, we have a lot of poultry here. Instead of throwing away the feathers, we can take it and you license the technology if we don't have it. okay, and provide a more sustainable or a more, but as this progresses, we have to grow more chickens and kill more chickens. So it's a dilemma. So it may not be the full solution, but there are other things that they used in the region to provide proper insulations and waterproofing and so forth to replace non-green type of technologies into place. So my take is we have to start from if I have the chance to build a mega project, which I'm already in the process of doing right now. We have to approach it from designs. We have to look at consulting companies who are pioneers and have the expertise in building sustainability from a performance perspective. You know, it has to, you know, if I build buildings, what's the space between the buildings? Do I need the shadow of one building overtake the other? I mean, I was trying to rent an apartment in Khubar, and you basically, I can step out the window and shake the hand of my neighbor from another building. Does that make sense? It doesn't make sense. Okay? I don't have light. I feel like I live in a cave. They put a window because the regulation says you put a window, but what good does it do if it's and so forth? But so there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. I think it has to start from the design, and we have to be conscious and work with the developers and provide the incentives to the developers with regulations, and then we have to be able to think long term and source the right materials, the right designs, and implement it, and explain to people how can this be affordable. It makes no sense to build a green building, but it's not affordable. I can't afford it. It makes no sense.
No, it's a very valid point. And to kind of, sum up the economics of the green building, I think it's clearly a divide between the type of customer buying it, the type of customer who can afford these platforms, are pretty much premium developments at the moment, and the people who cannot, which is your low to medium income housing. Unfortunately, we need a lot of government intervention to drive that sustainability, help these people get on the sustainable ladder, where using sustainability should not become a luxury. It should become mainstream as a way of life. And to kind of achieve that, I think one segment can't. There has to be a cohesive and collective force that's kind of, driving this whole change. And like Kamel said, government plays a very, very big role in incentivizing both at a customer level, at a business level, people who are building these establishments, and on the trade level of what kind of carbon credits are we looking at, what kind of environmental policies that we are looking at. So now, when you talk about government in the mature market, like we were saying, now a lot of these policies are coming into effect now as we speak on both businesses as well as consumers, that you got to be sustainable, you got to have these measures in place, otherwise you don't get tax incentives, you don't get a lot of those benefits that are linked to this. And because of this, people who've really embarked before on this whole green building methodology are obviously future-proofed, and they're now reaping the benefits of what they did few years back that others are forced to jump into, and that's costing them a lot of money.
I'd give an example to support what you're saying, and I'll give it from the local market, from Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, for a long time, the government was trying to tell developers and house builders and the municipalities is that we want you to insulate your home. Basically, the out walls, the walls facing the outside, needs to be insulated. The cost of the brick, between a brick that has polystyrene and without, okay, or the insulation, maybe it's about 50% more. So if one is 11 riyals or 12 riyals, the other one is about 15 or 16 riyals. Nobody went and did this. Nobody, no developer, no housing, nothing. Okay, it was a nice gesture, but now when they made it a regulation, okay, because it's really important, then everybody was forced to do it. There's a stiff penalty if you don't do it. Then everybody adhered to it. Now, the impact of that is the amount of energy that the home or the house required is reduced by 20%. The infrastructure now is able to reduce the load on them during hot summer times. They can channel that load into industry without having to build a huge set up other infrastructures and networks and so on. So there's a huge saving to the country. So regulation in certain areas really incentivized. And now the market itself adjusted itself. The developers adjusted their pricing. The people who are buying adjusted to the price that's being given to them, because that's the requirement. Tarshid did something very similar as well. They came back and they said, if you have an old air conditioner that uses so much kilowatt hours, we will pay 800 riyals. If you buy a new one, we will, let's say it costs you 1,000 riyals or 1,200 riyals. We'll pay 800 out of that, 70% of the cost of the new air conditioning, if you were willing to upgrade to a new air conditioner. More silent, more energy efficient. Guess the impact on the infrastructure. So in many cases in our region, it will require government intervention. We're doing our best. I know from talking to different government officials, they're doing their best. They're really putting out programs into this. But still, I think to us to have sustainable, energy efficient, water efficient, comfortable living, clean air, it will come to having to follow the footsteps of some of the developing countries of other incentives. And those incentives have to be able to break the barrier between the power supply company, regardless if it's a government owned or not, and individuals. In the US, you can have your solar, you can sell it, you can do this, and it's great. So we need to follow in some of those footsteps.
Please.
Hi guys, thank you for this insightful chat. My name is Nakul and I come from Australia, and you've mentioned a few times about matured markets, and I've had the experience of working in India, Africa, Middle East, and now Australia. So I've had a good perspective on both sides of the spectrum. And I've written down a few questions, my first question, which I think you have answered. I'm a buyer's agent or a buyer's advocate. So I take investors from Australia, from India, from various places and put them in various places of the world. And their intention is to maximize the return on investment, what is the capital growth, what is the rental yield and all that. I start talking to them about this. They're like, Nakul, you know what? Electricity is paid by my tenant. Water is paid by my tenant. And exactly what you said, Amit, they will sell the property after 10 years because they will get their money out. So I am showing them 3 options. One of them is green option, which is 20% expensive. One of them is the standard one. One of them is whatever. So he's not willing to pay that 20% premium on that green option, which is the problem is. And I would also advocate saying that, mate, why are you buying this expensive option? It's not going to give you any extra yield. You are going to exit. So that's one, area which confuses me, and I need your help. And are green buildings costly? I think the answer is yes. And I deal with both low-income people and HNIs as well. With low-income people, that conversation is futile. With people who want to buy their own homes to live, yes, they are willing to invest money into green, and because it will give them benefits. Also 100% agree, like matured markets, Australia, now there's a new building code coming in June and July. Developers are forced to do that because it's thrust down their throat through the government. India, not happening. Maybe 10 years back, now it's changed. Before 10 years, 15 years back, none of the developers, DLF and all these big boys, they wouldn't even go down that path, So what's your take on this side? And especially, how can I get these investors to get them into these green so that it maximizes their return on investment?
I think somewhere you've answered your own question. Now, investors don't really care because when people care is when it personally impacts them. That's the kind of thing with consumerism. So people who are purely buying it from an investment purpose, where the tenant pays the electricity and lives in it, and they're not they only look. So it's about looking at something personally and looking at something indifferently. Investments of this scale are generally taken quite indifferent as a commodity that you're going to buy and sell with whatever time period that you're going to hold it. Now, the thing with this is the question will be answered in two parts. The first part is the historic buyers that you are talking about, people my age. They really don't give a damn. And that's at least my own experience when I talk to a wide range of investors who buy property. Then comes the next generation, that are the youngsters today, and they do give a damn. And the people making money today through digital assets, cryptocurrency, decentralized finance, gaming, and all these new age industries that are beginning, even in renewable energy, people are getting into. They're fairly young people, and they definitely want to see everything quite sustainable. The concept of circular economy is coming in quite strong. On a lighter note, I'll give you an example. My niece visited me from the US, and I was taking her around in Dubai just to showing her. She literally chewed my brains for 1 hour debating on the fact that why on earth are you driving a petrol car and not an electric car? To an extent where I stopped driving my car and I was renting Ubers that are Teslas to take her around. I'm like, I don't want to kind of get into this debate. So yes, there is a systemic change happening. Might not be in the current generation, people who are getting into property on a big scale. There are some people who are obviously conscious, but more that I'm kind of looking at consciousness, it's about people who want to stay in these houses themselves and understand the long-term benefits on both their pocket as well as the environment. But if you're purely buying something from an investment property that you're going to probably flip in 5 to 10 years, like you said, with your customers, they really don't give a damn if it is renewable or not. So that's my take.
I want to add to this. I think you need to segment the market into two sectors, two different clients. One is one that's buying a home to live in. If I'm coming to Dubai, I want to buy a home to live in. Or am I buying it to rent it, and as an investor? Investors really look at, I pay the lease to buy a property. I need to finance it in a way so I minimize my out money, and I need to make more money out of the income so to support it. Okay. I would look at, address the first one, is the one that's buying on for his own to live in. The sell pitch is a little bit different. Okay, this is a bit more expensive, but it's healthier because you get more fresh air into this building. It's more energy efficient. If you take a similar apartment in someplace else, it's going to cost, the electricity bill will be 1,000 dirham versus here you're talking about maybe 600 or 400 dirhams, as an example. So over a period of time, a short period of time, you've already made that. The resale value of your home is much higher, and so forth. It's more comfortable to live in because you don't get as much heat. And so you create that sales pitch, the value proposition to the owner that wants to live. So my first question, is this for you or is this for investment? If it's for you, then I would channel them to green buildings or sustainable buildings. I like the word sustainability more than green because not everything green is sustainable. Then, if I am an investor, okay, then you have two kind of properties. One, is this in a premium development? So if you buy this, will you able to use that sales pitch that and get higher yield on your rental? So it's a matter of saying, okay, this is a premium building where you're buying a studio or an apartment. This premium building that you're buying from, it's sustainable and so on. So you're giving to everybody else that you care about sustainability and so on. But from a money wise, your return is higher as well in terms of rental, per night rental or per month rental and so forth. Okay. And you're providing your customer. So they will take that they will create their marketing pitch based on come to me because, and especially if they're looking at attracting European and North American clients that would come in. This message is quite important, and people are willing to pay for it, coming from outside. If it's not a luxury or a high-end property, whether it's a big tower in a prime location or it's not, then it's going to be a very tough sell, because I don't know what to tell you. The facts are facts. It's going to be really a tough sell, because the guy says, look, man, they should have thought about that when they built the building. Okay, I'm just here to buy, and I'm financing it and I'm selling it. So it's you as a salesman or as a real estate developer, a person, is how you approach the segment of the client that's coming in. For me, I care about sustainability. So I'm willing to pay the extra price because I'm living in it. Okay. But if I want to invest, I will look for something premium that I can get my money back and I can get better yields.
Summing that up from the money perspective is I've been investing in the impact space for now 3 years, and I've literally sunk in hundreds of millions of dollars of investor money in my own. And unfortunately, I'm not still seeing the return. So where there is a conscious rise of conscious consumerism happening quite rapidly, especially in the young generation, but we are still yet to look at the economic feasibility to pocket of deploying capital and making a return on it. That's at least my take from my own personal experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much.